Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for the two Facebook groups, Fans of Serif Software and the Affinity Design and Photo group. Now this originally was a Photo Plus tutorial, which was Serif's earlier PC only photo editing program, and I'd set it all up and I'd written out all the script for it and what have you, and then Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer were released, and I sort of forgot about that project, and I went in trying to sort of learn these two new programs on the PC. So when I was doing a bit of housekeeping on my computer the other day, I refound this script, so I thought I'd do it again, but adapt it for Affinity Photo. Now this was an adaptation of a Photoshop tutorial whereby you enhance the contrast and the detail in a portrait image. Now it probably does work best on a male portrait, because obviously women probably would like to have no blemishes and no sort of marks on the skin and whatever like that, whereas in a male image it can sort of make them look more rugged or something like that maybe. So this image, which I'm going to use, I got from Pixabay.com, and it is possibly slightly out of focus on the most important part, which is the eyes. And this is the result I got after making some changes. And as you can see, the detail is much more noticeable if I go back to that one. And it is a much more sort of rugged, manly look, for want of a better phrase. And that is the colour version. You can also then convert that to black and white, and whichever version you prefer in that respect. So let me close down these finished result ones. And so this is what I'm going to use, this image here, but if you have your own image, it might be better to use that. I've seen other videos very similar to this, and they probably do things in a slightly different way. Hopefully this is different enough from those to warrant its inclusion on YouTube and what have you. So open your main image, and then the first thing we need to do is to make a blank layer above the background, which is this icon in between these two over here. You just click on that and you have a blank pixel layer. And what we need to do to this is to fill this with 50% grey. There are a number of ways of doing this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the flood fill tool, but I need 50% grey as my foreground colour. Now in a previous video quite a while ago I did show about making keyboard shortcuts, and one of the options I did was make a keyboard shortcut to get 50% grey. So I'll just do that now, and as you can see I've now got grey here, but an easy way of just remembering this, that each one of the red, green and blue sliders will be 1, 2, 8. So they'll be all in the midpoint on their slider to get 50% grey. So I'll just click on the flood fill tool and fill that pixel layer with grey. Now I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this highlights, and you can just click on the layer to, or even double click it to get the renaming option up. And once I have done that, I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to overlay, so that you can't sort of see the grey anymore, but the grey is there and it will be having an effect on the image when we come to use the dodge and burn tools. But before I go ahead with that, I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I will right click here and go to duplicate, and then I'm going to rename this one Shadows. So I'm going to come back down to the highlights level just by clicking on it there, and then I'm going to come and select the dodge tool. Now the dodge tool you can get from the left hand toolbar down here, and it is in this sub menu here. You've got the dodge tool, burn tool and the sponge brush tool, but we want the dodge brush, and I'm going to reduce the size of the brush. You can reduce and increase the size of the brush using the square bracket keys, which are the two keys next to the P on the keyboard. I'll just reduce it down a bit. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have the hardness set on 0 up here, and this adjustments along the top here. The tonal range, we're going to go for mid-tones. I'm going to leave flow at 100%, and the opacity. Now in the original Photoshop tutorial and even in the Photo Plus tutorial, they did exposure settings. We don't seem to have that in Affinity Photo, so I'm hoping the opacity setting will work as the same way as the exposure setting in the original tutorial. So I've found that around 10 to 20% opacity works okay, so I'm going to come to 16%. It's close enough. So what you need to do is we're going to go over the lightest parts of the face. So you will need to reduce your brush size to suit whichever area you're going over. So I'm just going to go over this part up here, and his cheek around here, the end of his nose, and this other cheek over here. Then you can always just click on this tick here to turn that effect on and off to see how it's going. If you think you need to increase the opacity, you can do that, or just keep going over the same area just to increase the effect. This is like a bit time consuming, but so that's starting to have an effect. And I'll just do a little bit on his neck down here, and I will also go over these grey hairs just to help brighten those a bit. So I'm just going to reduce the size of the brush a bit and do these white lines and the area up there. Right. Could probably do it a little bit more, but I'm not going to spend too much time because it will just take up a lot of time. Me keep going over the same bits all the time. Right. So once you've completed the level of dodging that you want to do, so I think that's okay. The next thing you want to do is to change the tonal range from mid-tones to highlights. And I'm going to increase the brush size a bit here. And I am just going to reduce the opacity down slightly, down to about 10%, 9%, that's close enough. And this time I'm only going to go over the really brightest areas of the face, not necessarily all of the same areas that I did before. So again, I'm probably only doing half as much as what I did when I showed the samples earlier on. Let me just turn that layer on and off. But hopefully you can see that that is brightening up quite a lot of those areas. So again, I'm not going to go too mad for the sake of this video, but I think when I did this originally in my practice run, I did go over this quite a bit more than I am doing at the moment. So right, I will leave that at that point. So now we need to click and highlight the shadows layer and change the tool from the dodge tool to the burn tool. The dodge tool will make things lighter, the burn tool will make things darker. Now, very similar settings for when we were using the dodge tool. Hardness set on 0, and we're going to start off with the mid-tones, and I'm going to bring the opacity back up a bit around to the, let's go around about 18%. Again, I would say somewhere between 10 and 20%. And now it is a case of going over the darker areas of the image just to make them a bit darker. And again, reducing the size of the brush where needed. You just increase the brush size there. Right, and now I'm going to go over his stubble, whatever here, to make that a bit darker and stand out a bit more. Right, let me just turn that layer on and off a couple of times so I can see. Yes, it is starting to have quite a good effect, I think. Just go over it a little bit more. Just to make those darker areas slightly darker and bring out some of those details as well. Right, one last check. Yes, I think that's okay. So now I want to change the tonal range to shadows, and this time I'm going to make it a fairly big brush. Let's go at about there, which is roughly 1500 thereabouts, and I'm going to reduce the opacity on this one down to about 10% roughly. Now this time I'm going to click and hold the left mouse button down and go over the whole picture in one motion to hopefully get an even coating of the effect, rather than have sort of juddery lines where you are not 100% certain where you finished off one line and started another. So it's just a case of just go over the whole image. Maybe a couple of times, 2 or 3 times maybe, just to sort of build up the effect over the whole image. There we go. Just make sure we haven't missed anything, especially on the face. Right, then I'm going to change the tonal range back to midtones, and I'm going to do the same thing, just go over the whole image in one motion, trying to get everything, and especially the face. There we go, that's it. So if I turn that on and off now, that top shadows layer, that is the effect that we are having there. So the next thing I want to do now is to merge all these layers into a new layer. So if I just right click the top layer and come to merge visible, it will make a new layer that is just all of these effects already merged together. And then I'm going to come up to filters, sharpen, high pass, and I'm going to go, let's go up to about 7 pixels, and then click apply, and then change the blending mode to overlay, and that will, if I just turn this on and off, hopefully you can see there's a slight difference in the sharpness of the focus, because it is, the high pass will help bring out some of those details, but we want to bring them out a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to merge visible again. So I'll right click, come down to merge visible. So again we now have a new layer with everything merged together. And to this I'm going to come to the filter, again sharpen, but this time unsharp mask. Now the way that Affinity Photo works is slightly different to Photoshop and Photo Plus. I mean, for a start, the names are different, because I think in the other two is amount, radius and threshold. So I'm hoping that factor is the same as amount. But what I did was I set the factor on 2 and the radius on 20, and I left the threshold on 0. Click apply, and then for this layer I'm going to change the blending mode to lighten, and I'm just going to reduce the opacity down to about 50%, like that. So now if I turn that on and off, hopefully you can see that that is bringing out a lot of those details. So what I want to do now is duplicate this layer. So I'll right click, come to duplicate, but now change the blending mode to darken. So we have 2 layers doing the same thing, but one blended in lighten and one blended in darken. I don't think this has as much noticeable effect as the lighten one did, but hopefully you can see that that is bringing out the details just that little bit more. If you want, you could always increase the opacity of this layer just to help bring out those darker areas. I brought that up to 60%, that one. So now for the last time we want to merge visible. So right click, come down to merge visible, and we are again going to add the unsharp mask. That's filters, sharpen, unsharp mask, but we are going to do a much reduced version of this. We're going to have a factor of 1 and a radius of 0.5, again leaving the threshold on 0. Click apply, and that would be this finished. And if I just hold down the shift key and click on the highlights layer, that will highlight all of those layers, and if I just click on one of these ticks, all of those will turn off. So that was the start image, and this is the finished image with all of the effects that we have done. So I'll just re-click on this top layer. So technically you could finish at this point, and this is where the Photoshop tutorial finished. But if you wanted to just take this slightly a step further and make this a black and white image, because a lot of these sort of more punchy, gritty male portraits may look better in black and white than they do in colour. So before you just save and close, give it a try and see what it looks like. So come to the adjustments tab, click on black and white, and then it's just a case of altering these sliders to your particular tastes to see what works. Now I know that the original background here was yellow, so if I darken the background here and the yellow slider, that will make that image stand out a bit more. The blue slider is mainly affecting the eyes and the hair and the moustache. I'm going to bring that down quite low. Magenta I think mainly only really affects the lips and the area around the nose and eyes. I'll leave that about there. I think the green, if I remember rightly, affects mainly the whites and the greys in the hair. So if you wanted to reduce the amount of grey, for example, you could take the greens out and the reds, I'm guessing, is the skin tones. So I want to keep the sort of skin tone a bit darker, and it's just a case of tinkering with this to get a look that you like how it looks. So I will leave that like that. Come back to layers. So you can either go with a coloured version or a black and white version. So that is the end of the tutorial. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.